I am Ingrid Archie, the National Organizing Director for the TimeDone program.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shakyra Diaz. I'm the Chief of Federal Advocacy for the Alliance for Safety and Justice.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Shaena Fazal, and I am the Chief of State Advocacy for the Alliance for Safety and Justice.
Good morning. Aswad Thomas. I'm the Vice President of the Alliance for Safety and Justice. I also serve as the National Director of one of our flagship programs, Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice. So thank you all so much for joining us today. In doing this work, I think we've come to realize that no matter your race, gender, or class, that we all want to be safe. Right. So everyone, just close your eyes with me for a second, and think about where or time that you felt most safe. What is that scenery? What does it sound like? What do it look like? So now open your eyes. Let's get one person, you right here, sir. What came to mind for you when you thought about where you felt most safe?
Out in nature, and just the sounds of the breeze through the trees, the birds chirping.
Out in nature, the sounds, the trees, the bird. I'm quite sure for the majority of us, we didn't say more prisons. We didn't say more police. We didn't say more incarceration, right? What we thought about, many of us thought about being in community with each other. We thought about being with family. We thought about those things that actually keep us safe. And that's what today's conversation is about. It's about investing in the things that actually keep us safe, investing in more communities, more mental health programs, more community centers, more trauma recovery centers, more reentry programs. Those are the solutions that help keep people and communities safe. And that's what today's conversation is about. I turn it over to my colleague, Shakyra.
Thank you, Aswad. So just to continue off of that, we work in a very unique place. We work from this understanding that no one has to audition for humanity. We are all human beings. We are all deserving of place in this world, of respect in this world, and of dignity. Given that really basic understanding, we are rooted in ensuring that people who are most vulnerable get the support they need when in crisis, because we understand that unresolved crisis, unaddressed crisis leads to crime. So how do we do that? We wrap communities, entire communities, in support, in services, and interventions that stop crisis from becoming crime. What we know is that when we leave somebody completely abandoned when they need it most, the outcome is not good for themselves and it's not good for others. Our work has meant that we have passed over 100 different types of reforms to reduce the reliance on incarceration and make communities safer. Our work has meant that we have increased investments and access to victim services funds tremendously to make sure that underserved victims of crime are able to access support. We have secured millions of dollars to ensure that that is the case. Why is that? We believe in this idea of a safety return on investment. We all get that whatever we invest in grows, right? So if we invest in safety, that will grow. And it's not something that only a few people should have access to. Everyone should have access to safety, regardless of whether they can purchase it or not, right? We all should be able to enjoy walking outside or being in community, being with our families. Unfortunately, that is not a standard that everyone experiences. And for that reason, we believe that it is imperative to prioritize the safety of everyone, the most vulnerable in particular, by making sure that we are passing laws, policies, and ensuring that we are investing in interventions that scale safety, that guarantee safety, so that our return on investment is safety for all. Shaena?
Thanks, Shakyra. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do in terms of our legislative campaigns around the country. And the first thing I'll say is safety isn't a partisan issue. At the Alliance for Safety and Justice, we have a bias for action. We know there's a need for more people to have access to recover from the trauma of violent crime and a need for smart justice reform, and neither of those things are partisan. Instead, we have won on these issues because of the shared value of safety. I anticipate that trend to continue because safety is necessary for our survival and it's urgent. It's important to understand what we've learned from victims. Number one, they're not a monolith. Number two, they want more than anything for what happened to them, never to happen to them or anybody else again. And they know what we all need to get us to safety. And while victims care deeply about accountability, most victims also really care about rehabilitation for people in prison who are coming home one day. They care about mental health treatment. They care about substance use disorder treatment. And they care about clearing old criminal records because these are real proven solutions to safety challenges, the kinds of solutions that stop future victims. And it's important to demonstrate that implementing these safety solutions can be done regardless of which party is in charge, and to name it. Just a few things here to share with you. First, it's anti-crime to establish and increase incentive-based prison rehabilitation programs where there's a mountain of evidence that's shown that those programs decrease the chance that someone coming out would commit harm again. We did this in Ohio in a Republican supermajority legislature with a Republican governor and bipartisan support. It's anti-crime and pro-economy to improve access to record sealing and expungement and automate it wherever possible because it connects people to work and housing, basic things we all need to succeed. We did this in Florida and Arizona with bipartisan support. It's pro-safety to reform probation in a way that sets people up for success while also holding people accountable through changing how long someone stays on probation and the conditions in probation in a way that centers safety and success. We did this right down the street here in Texas a few years ago, and more recently in Florida, bipartisan through ruby red states. It's pro-victim to end restrictions on victims' compensation for people with criminal records. You heard that right. In some states, if you're a victim of crime, let's say this year in 2024, but had an unrelated criminal conviction from another year, you wouldn't be eligible for victims' compensation because of that old unrelated record. We changed this law in Ohio. And last, it's a public safety force multiplier to invest in trauma recovery services. We have done this in at least 12 states with bipartisan support. Safety transcends politics in many places, and we're making the case that it should transcend politics everywhere. Aswad and Ingrid are two heroic examples that I have the honor to work with every day, who've been directly impacted by the justice system and can speak to the importance of this work. And I'll turn it over to you, Aswad.
Thank you, Shaena. This morning when I woke up, I started to think about, this long journey of, to get to this point where I'm at in my life and in my career. 13 years ago, I had just became the first male in my family to ever graduate from college. I was also a star basketball player in Massachusetts. So for me, 2009 was like the highest point of my life. I had just graduated college. I was also on my way to play professional basketball. But unfortunately, just before I was supposed to leave to go to Europe, I was shot twice in my back during an attempted armed robbery. And those bullets ended my basketball career and nearly my life. I remember being in the hospital and being discharged. My doctors told me about the physical challenges that I would have, but they never mentioned the psychological effects of being a victim of gun violence, having to return back into that same neighborhood where you were shot. So just dealing with the flashback, the nightmares, the PTSD, the anxiety, the depression of recovering from these gunshot wounds on my mother's couch in her living room of a one-bedroom apartment. And through that experience, law enforcement came to visit me several times as I was recovering from that shooting. And each time they came to visit me, it was always about the case. They never asked me how I was doing. They never told me about the existence of a victim compensation program. They never told me about any victim services. In fact, they never told me about a victim advocate that works in their department that's supposed to help victims like myself. So there was no mention of any help. And so my family and I were left to deal with that experience on our own. So as I was recovering, I started to think about am I the only person that went through this experience of being a victim and not receiving any help? But I wasn't. So I called my father. He got shot in his chest in the 1980s. And I called him. I said, "Hey, Dad, when you got shot, did you get any help?" He said no. And then I hung up with him and I called my second oldest brother, who was also a victim of gun violence, who was shot in his back in the 1990s, and I asked him that same question: after you got shot, did you get any help? And he said no. And then I called my cousin. My cousin was shot in his back in the early 2000s, and as a result of that shooting, he was paralyzed from the waist down. And I asked him that same question: did you get any help? And the answer was no. So in my immediate family, 5 out of the 10 males are victims of gun violence. And we all had plenty of interactions with the justice system, but none that actually led to any help, any services to help us recover from those incidents. And it's still a challenge for us because of the long-term effects of being a victim of gun violence. But the thing that changed my life and started me on this journey to do this work was during my last doctor's appointment. So as I'm having surgery to remove the 2 bullets out of my back, my doctor started to tell me the story of a teenager who he had treated 4 years prior. This young man was 14 years old. He was a victim of gun violence. He was shot in his face. And as a result of that shooting, he lost sight in one of his eyes. And the more details my doctor started to share about that young man, as I'm on the operating table, my heart is just beating fast. It's just beating faster and faster. And it was a weird experience for me. I don't know why my heart was beating fast. It was because I was realizing he was describing the teenager that had shot me. And right then, I thought about that young man's experience of being a victim of gun violence at only 14 years old and being released from that same hospital back into that same community with no support. And I thought about his unaddressed trauma. And I strongly believe that unaddressed trauma played a huge role with me getting shot years later. And so, that experience there, drove me to working with Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, a national network of over 200,000 survivors across the country that are joining together to share our stories, to heal together, but also to advocate for a better justice system that prioritizes things like healing, prevention, and recovery over more spending on incarceration. So for most victims and most survivors across the country, when you actually talk to us about what safety looks like, safety for most survivors isn't about being tough on crime. It isn't about locking people up and throwing away the key. Safety is about investing in the healing, prevention, and the recovery needs of survivors. Safety is about more mental health programs, more youth programs. Safety is about more investing in trauma recovery centers. Safety is about when people who are in the justice system, that they are getting rehabilitation so that when they come home better than they were before. But also safety is about investing in the things that actually work. Mental health, reentry programs, trauma recovery centers. And we can get to safety by building this network of survivors across the country to advocate for these type of solutions that help stop the cycle of violence in community. So we build community with survivors. We train them to be advocates with the skills that's needed to talk to lawmakers, to talk to the media, and we also build political power by changing laws state by state across the country. And so when I do this work, I think about that young man that shot me. What if there was a trauma recovery center in his community? Maybe I wouldn't be here today recovering from those gunshot wounds physically and mentally. Maybe I would be in my professional basketball overseas. But I feel like God closed that basketball chapter in my life to do this work across the country. And I turn it over to my colleague, Ingrid.
Hey. So, I grew up and I was born and raised in South Central Los Angeles during the war on drugs. In my community, there was crime, there was violence, there was gang activity. All these things also existed in my home. At the age of 7, I was taken away from my mom for child abuse, excuse me. And I was placed into foster care till the age of 14, which when I started to run away from home. I started to get into gang activity. I started to go back and forth through different foster homes. And the response was every time I left the foster home was handcuffs. They never asked me, why are you running away? Of course, whenever you go to a foster home, they get your case record so they know why you're there. But I never got treatment in any of those foster homes for, any of the stuff that had gone on in my household or, for the reason why I was doing what I was doing. The response was always cuffs. And so from the age of 14 to 33, that was what my life looked like, in and out of juvenile halls, in and out of county jails, in and out of prisons. During all of those stints, I never was asked what happened. Never. I never was asked, how can we help you? It was always, yeah, we'll see you back. I knew in my brain that I was destined for something bigger. I just did not know what it was. In 2014, there was a law that was passed called Prop 47, which lowered 5 crimes to misdemeanors, and it released a lot of us who were in jail for those lower level crimes, back into society. And it reallocated the money that they would have used to arrest people back into the community. So what happened is that I woke up one morning in prison, and I seen an ad on TV advertising Prop 47. And I was like, that would be great if they passed this law, and then I also thought, if I got the second chance, what would it look like? And so 3 months later, I was in prison and I went to see my counselor. She told me that I didn't qualify for Prop 47 to come home, although I did. So I petitioned the court with an indigent envelope and 2 letters, one to the court, one to the clerk. 6 months later, I went to the same counselor and she told me that I had been resentenced and that I was coming home a year earlier. Which was great because I had kids at home and, they needed their mom. So I came home on this Prop 47 law. I was elated. I knew this was my second chance, but I did not know that this was the pathway to the work that I would do now. I came home, I fought for my children because they were placed in the system because I was incarcerated. I was supported by a community organization called A New Way of Life. They supported me in getting my kids back within 6 months, but it generally takes about 3 years for any person to get their kid out of the DCFS system. And with that support, it also shortened the time. After that, and I went to the office and my case was closed and my kids were returned. A guy told me, "You're one of the lucky ones." It made me angry because when you have children, they are your children. They don't belong to the system. They don't belong to institutions. They belong to you. And so for me, it ignited a fire that said, I don't want anybody else to feel lucky to be a mom or have the right to raise their children. I want to educate people on how to fight for your children when they are in the system. And this is how you rise above because you are not lucky. It is your right to be a mother. I went to a Prop 47 anniversary where I met Lenore Anderson and I told my story about how I came home on the law. And then I became the Prop 47 specialist at A New Way of Life, and I started to educate my community, door to door, knocking on doors saying, did you know about this law? Did you know that it could, reclassify your felony if you have it? Did you know you get your record expunged? And I walked and I walked and I walked. And, you know, sometimes when you walk and you get tired, I never got tired because I knew that I was giving somebody some real good information. I knew that it was helpful to somebody. I knew that somebody was going to become free because freedom is rooted in if I'm free, then we're all free, or we're not all free until we're all free, right? This also led to, you know, starting the TimeDone program and just expounding on the fact that when you have a felony on your record, there are so many no's that you receive. So throughout my life, you know, all the challenges that I faced, I was unemployed for 8 years, of course, because of my record. And I knew that I needed to educate people on why that exists. You know, there's 40,000 collateral consequences to a felony conviction that lawyers know about, but that the public don't. And many times when we are taking cases or when we plea out on cases, we plea out because we want to come home, and we don't understand that there is a whole nother lifelong sentence that you are going to live when you come home, and it is rooted in barriers, it is rooted in no's, it is rooted in a whole different life that you did not think that you were going to live. But I know that those no's were also a pathway to a career that would definitely land me here as the organizing director for one of the biggest programs in the country that serves over 200,000 people living with records. I tell my story, I inspire people, I walk alongside of people. This is a program that is judgment free, that lets people know that it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. You are a human being first. You are more than your record, and economic stability is important. Economic mobility is important. And if they told you that you weren't worth it because of your record, they lied to you. And the TimeDone program dispels those lies. And we are rooted in solutions to free our people. Thank you.
Now, thank you, Ingrid. Shakyra, I actually have a follow-up question for you before we turn to the audience for questions. So, Shakyra, you lead a lot of our work at the federal level. So you mentioned over the 100 reforms that we've passed, and a lot of that impact also comes at the federal. Can you talk a little bit more about some of our federal success and also about the trauma recovery center model? What is that?
Sure. Thank you, Aswad. So, not sure if you all picked up on the barriers that both Aswad and Ingrid elevated. And Ingrid said something, she said, you're more than your record. And for victims of crime, you are more than the victimization that you experience. So we understand that both constituencies, that, you know, the narrative has been that these two groups do not interact with each other, that these two groups are actually two groups, when in reality, there's a great deal of overlap. Not only are the majority of people who've come in contact with the justice system and have a past conviction, many have been victims of crime in their younger years, or you can see this mix within a household, a family, right? So given that, we work to remove those barriers. And many of those barriers are rooted in funding. So our work at the federal level has really prioritized how it is that we get the federal government to fund these interventions to make sure that victims of crime get the support they need so that there isn't any barriers to therapeutic wraparound support, access to housing when you need it, access or protections with employment, right? Similarly, people with past convictions experience the same barriers, accessing housing, accessing employment. It's the same thing, right? But the labels that society gives are different. So with that, we have worked to expand a federal program to ensure that states are able to apply for federal funding so that they can automate record clearance for people who are living with past convictions. So the reality is that oftentimes people are getting these convictions, and it's on you to figure out if you can remove it. And you have to pay to remove it, meaning you have to pay for an attorney. So we have expanded those resources to make sure the states have access to those funds. We've also been working really hard to grow the Trauma Recovery Center model. That model is wraparound support for underserved victims of crime, which guarantees 16 therapeutic sessions and provides services that are individualized. I often compare them, I'm a former educator, I compare them to the IEP, Individualized Education Plan for Children, right? Well, this is like an individualized healing plan for everyone's unique situation, right? A victim of gun violence may have different needs than a victim of sexual assault, right? So we are working to grow that model all across the country so that crime victims are not left to figure this out on their own and that they're healing and recovering. Our goal overall is to make sure that our federal resources, our public resources, are actually going towards ensuring that we have safety by ensuring that communities are able to reach stability, right? Both people with past convictions and people who have been victims of crime. And when we say that, we're talking about families, we're talking about communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Shakyra. There's a lot of questions coming to mind, so I'm just going to ask a few more. It's actually a question for you, Shaena. I've been reading a lot of news lately, been watching a lot of mentions about tough on crime as well. In places like Louisiana, California, and Georgia, and Washington, D.C., there's been a lot of rhetoric around being more tough on crime as a way to stop crime that's not increasing. We'd love to hear your thoughts on why is it important not to go back to being tough on crime? What are the impact that will have on our communities? And what are some of the solutions that we need to uplift?
Thank you for that. That is on my mind as well, often. I think, first of all, I take issue with the language that locking people up for longer terms with no rehabilitation is actually tough on crime. That's the first thing. I think the stuff I talked about earlier is tough on crime. Things that we know, like if you go to prison and you're coming home in 10 years, it is tough on crime to ask somebody that while you're there, a literal captive audience, to take advantage of rehabilitation programs, to be incentivized to do that, and then you demonstrate at the time of your release that you're prepared to come home unlikely or less likely to cause harm again, like you did before you went in. I think accountability is important. We see, it's dominating the news, sort of coverage about carjackings, other retail theft, things that we keep hearing about. I think number one, the data shows a very different story than what sometimes politicians are making these rollbacks on. They are also relying on a sort of old school victim that has been used over centuries, decades and centuries really, to make laws that are in the name of victims, quote unquote. When we've just shared today what we know about victims, they have a different view of what needs to actually happen. And yet we continue to think, some politicians continue to think that doing things, quote unquote, on the back of victims is actually serving victims, when we've learned today that's actually not the case at all. I still see glimmers of hope. I think that there is a real shared value in safety. I see that in state houses in all the states that we work in. I see people really motivated to have safety in their communities. I think that they really need to hear from more people in our victim network and our TimeDone network. They need to hear directly from people who have these experiences. These are legitimate public safety stakeholders that are all too often left out of the debate as people who know actually how to get us to safety, and instead used as a reason to do things that are actually contradicting what safety means. There has never been a study that said, you look at like return on investments, right? There's never been a study that said the money we spend on locking people up has returned a good investment for us. There's not one. And yet that's the budget item that continues to go through every state house, is more funding for prisons all of the time. And it's one thing we know for sure has literally no return on investment. Actually, it has a negative return on investment. Let me say it that way, because that's more accurate. And so I think we need to just get away from this idea that tough on crime means more police, more prisons, that safety means those things, as you said in the beginning with our opening exercise. And we need to do more educating, we need to do more outreach. Everybody in this room needs to talk to your local and state elected officials too. They have much more to do with what happens to people in prison, what happens at to increase safety in your own communities.
Awesome. Thank you, Shaena. Ingrid, I have one question for you. I'm asking questions because we got a little bit of time to get to the audience. So Ingrid, the TimeDone program that you've mentioned, over 200,000 members across the country, what has been the impact of creating this type of program for people like you across the country who have a record, who face those over 40,000 legal barriers? What has been the impact of the TimeDone program on people and families across the country?
So the impact that we have had is that people have found a place, number one, where it's people that are just like them. People, they found a place where they're being educated, about the different barriers that we face, because a lot of times people don't know why they're being told they can't get a job, or, they're being told that they can't move, to a different neighborhood, or why they can't afford to move to a different neighborhood, or why they're being paid such a low wage on their jobs, why it's so hard to get ahead. We've been able to grow in 5 different states. The impact that we've had in California has been great. We were able to pass one of the biggest pieces of legislation in the country in California, where people who have come from prison and jails can now get their records expunged under Senate Bill 731. No one in the world has been able to do this. And we come straight from the community, doing this big, amazing work. And so we wanted to make this exact same impact in states that had the highest incarceration rate, states like Ohio, states like Michigan, states like Texas. Here we are, Texas here. States like PA, Pennsylvania, and we're moving into other states as well, but the impact has been great. The program is new and is growing fast. It's one of the fastest growing programs of people with old records. I have the honor to be able to, stand alongside of my colleagues, and we lead together in making this country a better place, because we are what safety looks like.
Thank you, Eric. I have a few more questions, but I'm going to pause for now, but we'd love to open it up to the audience if there's any questions that you all have. I'd love to see when people are jumping up for questions. If you could introduce yourself and your question, that'd be great.
Yeah, I moved over here. You could tell I was jumping up to ask the question. My name is Laura Ann Gerson. I live here in Austin, and I'm a part of a social justice group that has met every Monday I'm not missing it today, from 10 to 12 for the last 5 years on Zoom. And you watch TV and you have the right to remain silent, and if you can't afford an attorney, you can have one will be appointed for you. But and I can't speak for every state. I'm not a lawyer, but in Austin, or in Texas, you first have to go to magistration, which is, they call it magistration here, and it's called something else in other places, where they go to the judge to determine whether or not you get bond. And you do not have a right to have an attorney at that point. You have a right to have an attorney only after the judge has determined whether or not you get bail, and then that happens. So we have been fighting for 5 years. I've testified many times to the county commissioners. The problem is that the federal government came up with this great ruling that low-income people have a right to an attorney, but the federal government doesn't fund it. And so it goes to the state, and the state of Texas, well, we all know who our governor and lieutenant governor but Austin has its moments. But we're fighting to try to find funding. And the funding should be coming from the federal government, and instead of having to wait for the state to come up with the funding, the state has decided that, I'm sorry, we're just gonna let the counties come up with the money. And the counties don't have the money. And therefore, people go and they don't have money. And so the police have made their report, and the judge is doing the best they can. They're doing the best they can. And then the person sits in jail for a few weeks, loses their apartment, possibly loses custody of their kids, loses their job. And then after they figure they've been there for a week or so, oh, gee, the county attorney's now had time to get through it all and go, oh my God, there's not enough evidence here. And so I believe the federal government should be funding the states to fund all the cities to have representation for people once they've been arrested, before they determine whether or not they get bond. And if you guys could do that, that would be just so very awesome.
I agree with you. That would be awesome.
Yeah, that would be awesome. No, thank you for that. That's a huge task for us. But I do want to point out, so if you are in Texas, you want to get involved in our work here in the state of Texas, our state director, Tara Tucker. Tara, if you could raise your hand, who leads our work in the state, please connect with Tara. But that's a huge task that we'll put on our bucket list one day.
Thank you all for, thank you, especially you both, for sharing your stories. I have two distinct, separate questions. So I'm a student. I'm getting a dual degree, a law degree and a social work degree. And I definitely believe that I live in Chicago. And if I've learned anything, thank you. The victim offender binary is just, it's fictional. It doesn't exist. And, we criminalize victims when we can subpoena them to testify. And we, criminalize victims constantly when police have to arrest whoever is, the least injured at a call. And so I definitely believe that. And I also want to thank you for highlighting your experience with the family regulation system. I think as a social worker or future social worker who's complicit in that, that's something that's not highlighted enough. But so my two questions, one, how, if at all, does restorative justice fit into the work that y'all are doing? It feels like that would be something that maybe would naturally fit, or if at all. So just how does restorative justice fit into the work that y'all are doing? And two, different, but so I live in Chicago, and Brandon Johnson was just elected, and there was people positing that the communities that elected him don't care about crime to the level that the communities that were pushing the other guy. But that's not true, but a lot of the initiatives take time to see results. And so, funding, you first have to fund things, and then it takes time to see the results. So how do you frame that when you are trying to push for more funding for things that actually work, knowing that it's not going to be an immediate result? Thank you.
So I'll address your second one. I'll give you an example of what it looks like to actually fund for safety. One of our partner organizations, the Community-Based Public Safety Collective, has been doing great work in the city of Newark around this idea that if we scale for safety, if we invest in all those interventions appropriately for what that community needs, then we are better able to respond to whatever crisis arises. So the outcome of that in the city of New Jersey has been a significant 60-year reduction in homicides. And that same also is reflected in a reduction in shootings, right? But this is just one, and we're working on trying to see what that looks like across the country. But there's also this alternative. What we've been doing ain't working, right? Because if it was working, there would be no need for incarceration or prisons, right? But what's happening gets to the point that you elevated. You talked about systemic bureaucracy and extreme waste of resources that basically destroy an entire family. When you are preventing somebody from being able to have a home, when you are preventing someone from being able to have a job and provide for their families, what you are doing is undermining public safety. So when we get to this idea that if we scale and support, that's how we fund safety. Because this bureaucracy, these barriers, that are really sold to us, right? With this idea that this is what we get safety in the long run. How long has Law and Order been on? Like forever, ever, right? So we have this, we keep getting message that even that is fake, right? Because when we think about like, what is it like to actually be a victim of crime? That is not how it goes. The idea that rape kits get tested, that is a fallacy. That is not consistent across this country in no way, shape, or form. We don't have fully funded crime labs. Crime labs get funding to specialize in one thing. They can get funding for ballistics. They may not get it on rape kits. And when we have situations where federal funding is really tied to like convictions, that's a big problem, which is why our work is really tied to this understanding that our success is safety, not convictions, not arrest. Do we all feel safe? And that's how we get there.
Can I add one thing? Just because you're going to answer the first question, yeah? No, I want to answer the second question. I'm piggyback on Shakyra. So Illinois is one of the states that we work in. And we have one of our Illinois team members here in the back, acting like he doesn't know us, but he's here. And you know, one thing that Mayor Johnson has done is said he's committed to bringing trauma recovery centers or understanding them to the city. So I wanted to lift that up for Chicago specifically, and also just to say, I think your question was around like there's sort of this old guard of people that voted for one candidate that had one vision of safety. Mayor Johnson was presenting a different one, and there's critique now that the folks that voted for him that won don't actually hold safety in the way that we're used to. And I think that that's the niche there, is that it's the way that we're used to. And that's why this panel is called New Leaders for Safety and Criminal Justice Reform, because it is really about elevating people with experiences like Aswad and Ingrid at the front of things that have so long been ignored or invisible or basically disappeared, and not part of the solutions, but the ones who are shouldering the burden of the things that sort of what we've done historically, instead of what we can be doing now. And I think Mayor Johnson so far been an early adherent, at least to trauma recovery centers, and we hope more. So I just wanted to lift that part up specifically for Chicago. And thank you for the question.
And I'll just answer the first, because one, Social Workers Unite, I got my master's in social work. You up here, two social workers, which is great. I see you back there, Holly. You know, for us as an organization of crime survivors, you know, restorative justice play a key part in what we advocate for. You know, thousands of crime survivors are advocating for more restorative justice programs, more rehabilitation rather than more punishment and incarceration. You know, what I didn't mention earlier, that there were 2 young men involved in my shooting. You know, the one that I mentioned was also a victim, but the second one was arrested. In my case, he was facing 40 years in prison at the age of 19 years old. The first day of trial, you know, that didn't sit well with me, that a 19-year-old will be sentenced to 40 years in prison. And I started to advocate for him. So I advocated for him to take a lesser sentence. I remember asking the prosecutor, can I talk to that young man? I wanted to let him know that I wasn't angry. I wanted to let him know that, you know, one day you get out of the incarceration system, that I will be there to help support you. So I wanted to talk to that young man, and they told me no, that I couldn't talk to him. And said, why would you want to talk to someone who ended your basketball career, who nearly ended your life? But for me as a victim, what would help me heal was talking to that young man to learn more about what he'd been through in his life that led up to that fateful night. So I was successful in advocating for him. So instead of him receiving 40 years in prison, he was sentenced to 10 years. So I got the accountability that I wanted, but also knew that he wanted to sentence to a long-term prison sentence as well.
All right, hi folks. My name is Matt from San Diego, and I've been working with folks in and out of San Quentin Prison, which is now San Quentin Rehabilitation Center in California, for the past decade or so. More about that later, but I am currently working on a very innovative new startup, and I'd love to get your ideas. The startup is a post-incarceration housing and rehabilitation center whose population will be high-risk potential reoffenders as deemed by the state. We have 90 to 180 days with these folks, and we're really thinking about innovative ways to impact their lives. So, of course, we'll have the normal, addiction recovery type of stuff, but we're looking at a lot of trauma-informed work. We're looking at 24-hour, 7-day-a-week AI-based coaching and counseling and some things like that in this center. So I'd love your thoughts and your wisdom. And our goal is to make a model location, measure recidivism, and hopefully replicate this all over. I love the things you're working on. I love, making sure families are intact and treating it at the root. This is where we are working on the problem. It's not everything, but I'd love some of your ideas. If it were you running this, what would you want to make sure was part of that facility?
I would make sure that there was mental health services a part of the facility.
Of course.
When you are in prison, it's almost like living in a third world country. It's like, it's a war every day. And when you come home, it's like you're coming home from a war and you're coming into a society that you do not know. Mental health, there should be a lot of information about just, very small things, how to fill out applications, how to use a cell phone, how to catch a bus. All of the life skills would be definitely the next thing, because coming home and being able to re-enter into society for a person who has done a significant amount of time, it takes at least 10 years to really get your bearings. This is not a fast transition. There should also be, job readiness, a coach that would coach you on how to, be on a job. Just because you get up in the morning and you're in prison and you work a job, it's not teaching you job skills, how to deal with people's different personalities and stuff like that. It's completely different. So just things like that, are things that are necessary and needed.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll be honest, we have all the basics covered. I mean, the entire staff, except for myself, are all post-incarcerated individuals. So there's a lot of knowledge on that. So I'm looking for really innovative, unique things that aren't out there that you think need to be tried and could be effective.
Guaranteeing employment for everyone who leaves out of your facility.
I was just going to say that. I was going to say also expungement services for people who will be able to qualify, because they're going to be told no a lot.
731.
And helping people to be able to understand that barrier, educating people on those barriers are very important, and making sure that you connect with employers who are going to hire people with records, specifically the population that you serve.
Yeah, and I was just like, y'all should definitely connect. Ingrid yesterday was telling me about this idea that she had for a mobile app, right? She don't want to say publicly, right? But I do think it's a great idea, so y'all should definitely connect offline as well. Thank you for the question.
Yeah.
What's going on, y'all? My name is Cole. I live in Columbus, Ohio, but I was raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So I have two distinct questions. Forgive me if you already addressed them because I came in a little bit late. But the first question is regarding cash bail. I don't know if you guys spoke to that at all, but I just want to hear you guys' thoughts around that. And then also, I worked for the Ohio legislature for about 4 years, so I want to know, and currently I work for Columbus City Council. So I want to hear you guys' thoughts regarding home rule and what happens when the legislature ties the hands of local municipalities. Yeah, I know,
You live in Ohio.
We'll
So
tag team, how about that? So I took a deep breath. I'm from Ohio, I live in Ohio. So when you said home rule, I was like, Cleveland? Yeah. Hey. So, glad you're here. Want to make sure that you connect with Shaena. She's leading our legislative work around the country, and obviously Ohio is one of those states. So bail is a very complex issue. It's one of the toughest, right? Like one of the toughest reforms to enact across the country, like in any state. No matter what the demographics are, whatever the politics are, it's very complex because there's so many stakeholders involved in the process, right? So it's very complex, and every state has this unique perspective on it. That said, back to your point about home rule, I think one of the things is the way that we talk about things, right? It's really important for us to highlight all the different ways that these systems fail to get us to safety, right? So highlighting, one, that we're undermining safety. Two, that we are wasting millions of dollars with this idea of safety that is not getting anybody safety. I think that has been like our most effective way of getting the most conservative to the most liberal elected and appointed officials to work together to advance our reforms. So I'm not sure if you were here when Shaena spoke, but we've been able to change laws related to people with past convictions being able to access services, as well as shortening the length of time for people who are under correctional control.
I will just say about bail, it's actually an issue that in this organization we tend not to work on, but we are definitely paying attention to it because it affects the work that we do. And we can look to both New York and Chicago, or Illinois, I should say, sorry. I always think of Chicago as Illinois, but New York and Illinois both passed bail reform, and the sky has not fallen. When everybody has fear-mongered pretty extensively, and when I say fear-monger, I mean it's very dishonest, actual lying out there in the papers, sending mailers to people, and still that people on the ground voted for it, and in both places, the sky literally has not fallen. So I think that's just a lesson. And that, I think we've heard about bail before. I agree with you. Indigent defense is a problem across the country, especially in small communities where you have lawyers who have no experience doing criminal justice work, handling death penalty cases. It runs the gamut from arrest to death penalty cases for sure. But I know, and home rule is also under attack in lots of places around the country. So I don't know if that answers it sounds like you have another question because you stood up again. So
no. I was just gonna, have a little dialogue, but I appreciate that. I appreciate the response.
But I would love to talk to you afterwards and see if you can help us.
For sure.
On Senate Bill 288.
Appreciate y'all.
Hello. Hi, my name is Tinselin Sims. I'm a co-founder ED of an organization, We Make the Future. We focus on messaging and narrative. And so we have the unfortunate benefit of always thinking about the way people talk about issues and how that impacts long-term imagination around an issue. And one of the things that comes up often is that every 4 years when we have a presidential election, as well as all of the other elections that take place in between that time, crime and criminal justice becomes a top button divisive rhetoric that's used in order to help fuel people's political aspirations, is the word I'll use. And so we do a lot of work trying to help folks figure out other ways of talking about these issues, because what ends up happening is one side starts this really divisive, tough on crime rhetoric. The other side feels like, no, I have to say I love the police more than you do. And then they both end up in this whole battle of showing who will bow down the most to that type of criminal thinking around criminal justice reform. And so I'm curious if you've done any exploration of ways that people are exploring talking about these issues in other ways to kind of bring folks in and push back on some of the dominant rhetoric that takes place in politics, but also infiltrates the way that everyday people think about reform.
I think I'll start. I think we definitely take a lot of care in messaging in any of our legislative campaigns. Because we know that our audience is diverse, and that what I have learned actually is what tends to work with more progressive legislators doesn't work with the conservatives, but the reverse is true. So what works with conservatives also works with progressives. So if you say, for example, I use the term anti-crime several times, No one's going to be like, no, I'm opposed to being anti-crime, right? That's something that just really sticks to people. And if we're talking about things that actually have evidence that supports that what they do works to actually lower recidivism, we can use that in the narrative. Last session, we passed 2 bills in the Florida legislature that were, this is a very red state with a very red governor. And that's how we framed it, as anti-crime, pro-victim, pro-economy, when it was a record-sealing piece of legislation, so that it helps get people back to work. That got the business community on board with us. And so it's a way of bringing unlikely allies on, and it's also telling the truth. Like we're actually, we don't win anything by saying that you're not tough on crime, or you're soft on crime, tough on crime. That's just a failing, you just get stuck in the cement there on both sides, and you can't win that. So I think really focusing on not if it's tough on crime or soft on crime, but is it anti-crime? Because everybody can be anti-crime. That's one example, but yeah, we take a lot of care on messaging. But if you have work or a website, I would love to see it. And I'm always looking at least for ways to message. I read a lot of Lakoff and FrameLab stuff. But anything else that you have, I'd be really delighted to learn more. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add.
Yeah, in addition to like the messaging, that's important, but also it's like building political power as well. So we have a campaign called Heal the Vote, which is a national bipartisan effort to mobilize survivors as a key voting bloc across the country, and we are excited to be announcing publicly for the first time that we are hosting the first ever Crime Survivors Speak March on Washington this September 23rd and 24th to bring thousands of crime survivors from across the country to Washington, D.C. To really let policymakers know and also let the public know what safety looks like to us. And when we talk to people who are most harmed by crime and violence, those people, those communities are least supported by the justice system, are least supported by victim services. So we're organizing across the country, going to Washington, D.C. 2 months before the election, which is very intentional, and we're going to heal the vote by making sure that the solutions that we talked about today are at the center of policy making. We have overcrowded prisons, we have mass incarceration because law enforcement, elected officials, and media, and a very narrow voice of crime victims have advocated for being tough on crime. The challenge and the issue with that, they haven't talked to the people who are most harmed by crime and violence every day. We're changing that by uplifting what safety look like to us in our communities, what safety look like to all of you all, which is what a lot of solutions that we've talked about today. So the messaging is important, but also building political power, and we're doing that through our Heal the Vote campaign and bringing survivors to Washington, D.C. later in this year.
Thank you.
And it doesn't hurt to redirect, right? For a lot of folks who are campaigning on this idea around tough on crime, redirect them. What are you doing to support victims of crime in real life, right? Like, we have to have a better sense of like what folks are voting for, what they are supporting, what they are advocating for. There is no reason why a victim of domestic violence should be told that they have to wait 4 weeks for housing when they are in an urgent situation. There's no reason why a victim of crime should have to lay on his mother's couch to recover without any additional support or services for him or his family, right? So redirecting, it's easy and lazy to do that tough on crime thing, right? It's harder to get to the meat of and figure out how is it that we're gonna support victims of crime to make sure that communities are safe, right? Because in that argument, what you do is that you are using victims, but you're not helping victims. So redirecting them to help victims of crime and what they've done to do so.
So we have about 2 minutes, just closing thoughts, 20-second, Ingrid. What do you want people to take away from today's conversation? We've got Ingrid, Shakyra, Shaena, then I'll close this up.
People living with an old record are mothers, fathers, uncles, grandparents. We also are homeowners. I just recently bought a house. We are business owners, we're entrepreneurs, we are everything great.
So I'm really honored to just be sitting here with this dynamic group of people. We have So many of our amazing colleagues are sitting with us today. It's an honor to do this work. I hope that we have touched you, or at least got you to think about a couple things. I want to urge you to join us in this effort. Please scan the QR code to join us, learn more about what we're doing, and help us change this country so that we all know what it looks like and feels like to live in a safe community.
Yeah, I echo a lot of what you said. It's such a privilege to work here and with the people I get to work with every day. I think we're in a political moment right now. We are facing an uphill battle. We need everybody to stay involved, to speak the truth and push back on narratives that are out there that are dangerous and harmful and going to lead us down a path that isn't the one that we want. It's not the path that gets us to safety. So I just call on all of you. I hope that you were learned something new and feel motivated from today to go back to your communities and help us create this new safety movement.
Yeah, and I would just want you all to repeat after me. You know, we all deserve a right to heal and recover. We all deserve a right to, get housing and jobs and education after having an old record. So what we say as an organization is when survivors speak, change happens. So I'm gonna say when survivors speak, I want you all to say change happens, all right? When survivors speak, change happens. When survivors speak, change happens. When survivors speak, change happens. That's how we get to safety. Thank you all so much for joining us today.